The laughter echoed through the marble corridors of Richardson Tech Industries like a cruel symphony, as employees watched Maria Santos scrub the floors they walked on without a second thought. What they didn't know was that by tomorrow morning, those same people would be staring at her name, embossed in gold letters on every piece of company letterhead, and their world would never be the same again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's hands moved methodically across the polished marble floor of the executive wing, her worn rubber gloves squeaking against the surface as she guided the industrial mop in steady, practiced strokes. The clock on the wall read 11:30. At night, and the towering glass building was nearly empty, except for the security guards and the cleaning crew. This was her world now, these quiet hours when the corporate warriors had retreated to their suburban homes, leaving behind the debris of their important lives for people like her to clean up. At 28 years old, Maria looked older than her years. Her thick black hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, secured with a simple rubber band that had seen better days. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes, evidence of the double life she had been living for the past 6 months. Her uniform, a simple navy blue polo shirt with the cleaning company logo, hung loosely on her thin frame. She had lost weight since starting this job, partly from the physical demands and partly from the stress of maintaining her elaborate deception. The sound of expensive heels clicking against marble interrupted her thoughts. Maria looked up to see 3 women approaching, their designer handbags swinging as they walked with the confident stride of people who had never questioned their place in the world. She recognized them immediately. Jennifer Walsh from marketing, Amanda Chun from human resources, and Sarah Mitchell from finance. They were part of the inner circle, the group of ambitious young executives who seemed to glide through life on a cloud of privilege and opportunity. "Oh look, the cleaning lady is still here," Jennifer said with a laugh that held no warmth. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, and her red lipstick remained flawless. "Working the night shift again, Maria? Must be nice to have such a simple job where you don't have to think about anything complicated." Maria continued mopping, keeping her eyes focused on the floor. She had learned early in this charade that the key to invisibility was to never engage, never give them a reason to look too closely or ask too many questions. But inside, her heart was pounding with a mixture of anger and determination that had sustained her through months of this humiliation. "I heard she doesn't even speak English very well," Amanda whispered loudly enough for Maria to hear. "My friend in HR said she barely filled out the application. Can you imagine having such limited options in life? Just cleaning up after successful people for minimum wage." Sarah pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of Maria mopping. "This is going on my story. My followers won't believe some of the characters you meet working late in corporate America. Look at her technique though, she's actually pretty thorough for someone with no education." The 3 women erupted in laughter again, their voices bouncing off the high ceilings and glass walls. Maria felt each word like a physical blow, but she forced herself to maintain the facade. They had no idea they were mocking Maria Santos. Richardson, granddaughter of the company founder and legitimate heir to the business empire they served. They couldn't know that she held advanced degrees from Harvard Business School and MIT, or that she spoke 4 languages fluently. Most importantly, they couldn't discover that in less than 12 hours, she would be walking into the boardroom to claim her rightful position as Chief Executive Officer. "You know what I love about people like her?" Jennifer continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "They're so grateful for any opportunity. She probably thinks this is the best job she's ever had. No stress, no responsibility, just push a mop around and collect a paycheck. Must be liberating to have such low expectations for yourself." Maria's grip tightened on the mop handle. 6 months ago, she had been living in London, working as a strategy consultant for multinational corporations and preparing to take over Richardson Tech when her grandfather stepped down. But when David Richardson suffered a massive heart attack, everything changed. His will contained a clause that had shocked the entire family. Before Maria could inherit control of the company, she had to work within the organization for 6 months without revealing her identity, to understand the business from the ground up and prove she could connect with employees at every level. Her grandfather had been a brilliant man with unconventional ideas about leadership. He believed that true leaders needed to understand the experiences of everyone in their organization, from the janitors to the executives. So Maria had created a false identity, complete with fabricated references and a backstory about being an immigrant from Mexico looking for steady work. The cleaning company had hired her without question, and for 6 months she had scrubbed floors, emptied trash cans, and cleaned bathrooms while observing how the company really operated when the executives thought no one important was watching. "I bet she doesn't even know what we do here," Amanda said, checking her reflection in her phone camera. "Probably thinks we just sit around in meetings all day. She has no idea about the complexity of running a technology company, the strategic thinking required, the education you need to succeed in this environment." Maria almost smiled at the irony. She knew more about Richardson Tech's operations than any of these women ever would. She had spent her childhood summers in these offices, learning about circuit boards and software development from engineers who had worked with her grandfather for decades. She had written her master's thesis on emerging technologies in artificial intelligence, specifically analyzing case studies from Richardson Tech's pioneering work in machine learning applications. "Speaking of which," Sarah said, glancing at her designer watch, "did you guys hear about the big announcement tomorrow? Apparently old Richardson's granddaughter is finally going to take over as CEO. Can you imagine? Some spoiled rich girl who's probably never worked a real day in her life just walking into the corner office because of her last name." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I heard she's been living in Europe for years," Jennifer added with obvious resentment. "Probably spending Daddy's money on shopping and spa treatments while we've been climbing the corporate ladder the hard way. And now she gets to be our boss just because she won the genetic lottery. It's so unfair." Amanda nodded vigorously. "I've been with this company for 5 years, working 60-hour weeks, sacrificing my personal life to build my career. And some princess gets to waltz in and take the top job without paying any dues. I bet she doesn't even understand our industry. Probably thinks technology means knowing how to use Instagram." Maria felt a surge of anger mixed with sadness. These women had no idea what she had sacrificed to prepare for this role. The years of education, the internships at competing firms to understand the broader industry, the nights spent studying market analyses and financial reports. Her grandfather had insisted she earn her place through merit, not just inheritance. That's why she was here, mopping floors and enduring their mockery, learning lessons about leadership that no business school could teach. "You know what the worst part is?" Jennifer continued, warming to her theme. "She's going to come in here and probably fire half of us to make room for her friends. Rich people always do that. They clean house and bring in their own people. We'll be lucky if we keep our jobs, let alone get the promotions we deserve. Maybe we should start looking for new positions now," Sarah suggested. "Get ahead of the inevitable layoffs. I'm not going to sit around waiting for some entitled brat to decide my fate." Maria continued her methodical cleaning, but her mind was racing. This conversation was revealing more about the company culture than months of formal observation ever could. The resentment, the assumptions, the complete disconnect between management and staff. These women saw themselves as hardworking underdogs, but they treated Maria with the same dismissive attitude they accused the wealthy of having. The irony was almost overwhelming. "Look at her," Amanda said, pointing at Maria as if she were an exhibit in a museum. "Completely oblivious to our conversation. Probably doesn't understand half the words we're using. This is exactly the kind of person the new CEO will probably overlook completely. Just invisible service workers who keep the place running while the important people make decisions." Jennifer laughed again. "Can you imagine if someone like her tried to give us orders? Like, excuse me, but I don't think the cleaning lady is qualified to have opinions about corporate strategy. Some people need to know their place in the world." Maria's hands were trembling now, but not from fear or sadness. It was righteous anger, the kind that fueled revolutions and changed systems. These women were about to learn a very important lesson about assumptions and respect. Tomorrow morning, when she walked into that boardroom wearing a tailored suit, instead of a cleaning uniform, their comfortable little world of prejudice and entitlement would come crashing down. But tonight, she was still Maria the cleaning lady, invisible and dismissed. She finished mopping the section where they stood and began moving toward the executive offices. As she passed Jennifer, she deliberately bumped into her slightly, causing the woman to step back dramatically. "Watch where you're going," Jennifer snapped. "God, you can't even walk in a straight line. No wonder you're stuck pushing a mop around at your age. Probably the best job you'll ever have." "Sorry, Maria," mumbled in heavily accented English, playing her role perfectly. "Very sorry, miss." The three women exchanged looks of superiority and continued their conversation as if Maria had ceased to exist. But Maria had heard enough. Tomorrow would bring justice, but tonight she had work to finish. The executive conference room needed to be spotless for the morning meeting where her true identity would be revealed. She wanted everything to be perfect for the moment when these arrogant, dismissive women would finally understand that the person they had been mocking was about to become the most powerful figure in their professional lives. As she pushed her cart toward the corner office that would soon be hers, Maria allowed herself a small smile. Her grandfather had been right about the value of this experience. She had learned more about leadership, respect, and human nature in 6 months of cleaning floors than she had in years of formal education. Tomorrow, when she took control of Richardson Tech, she would remember every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment of being treated as invisible. But more importantly, she would remember the lesson her grandfather had tried to teach her about the dignity of all work and the humanity of every employee. The marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Maria worked her way through the executive wing, each stroke of the mop bringing her closer to the moment when everything would change. In just a few hours, the sun would rise on a new chapter in Richardson Tech's history, and 3 very surprised women would finally understand that appearances can be deceiving, and respect should never be conditional on someone's uniform or perceived social status. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that made Chicago's skyline sparkle, like a promise of new beginnings. Maria stood in the employee parking garage at 5:30 in the morning, changing out of her cleaning uniform in the back seat of her modest Honda Civic. She had deliberately chosen this unremarkable car to maintain her cover, though her actual vehicle, a sleek BMW, sat in a private garage across town. Every detail of her deception had been carefully planned, every aspect of her false identity meticulously crafted. She pulled on a simple black dress and cardigan, clothes that were nice enough to look professional, but modest enough to avoid drawing attention. Today was different from all the others. Today she had a meeting with someone who could change everything, someone who had no idea they were about to encounter the real Maria Santos Richardson. Marcus Thompson had been watching the cleaning crew for weeks, but not for the reasons his colleagues might suspect. As Richardson Tech's head of operations, he prided himself on knowing every aspect of the business, from the highest-level strategic decisions to the most basic operational details. He had noticed Maria during his late-night walks through the office, not because she was particularly remarkable, but because she was remarkably thorough. While other members of the cleaning crew rushed through their tasks, Maria took her time. She organized supply closets that hadn't been properly arranged in months. She noticed burned-out light bulbs and reported them to maintenance. She even straightened picture frames and arranged magazines in waiting areas with an attention to detail that seemed unusual for someone in her position. Marcus had begun to wonder about her story. At 35, Marcus had climbed the corporate ladder through merit rather than connections. He had grown up in Detroit, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher, and he understood what it meant to be underestimated because of your background. He had put himself through college working nights at a warehouse, and he never forgot the dignity of honest work or the intelligence that existed at every level of an organization. This morning, he had arrived early specifically to catch Maria before her shift ended. He found her in the executive break room, carefully wiping down the coffee machine and restocking supplies with the same methodical precision he had observed for weeks. "Excuse me," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Maria looked up, her heart immediately racing. Had someone discovered her identity? Had she made a mistake that exposed her deception? She forced herself to remain calm, to stay in character as the humble cleaning woman who spoke limited English. "Yes, sir," she replied, adding a slight accent to her words. "Something wrong with cleaning?" Marcus smiled, and Maria was struck by the genuine warmth in his expression. He was a tall man with kind brown eyes and graying temples that gave him a distinguished appearance. Unlike many of the executives she had observed, there was no condescension in his manner, no sense that he considered himself superior to the people who cleaned his office. "No, nothing wrong at all," he assured her. "Actually, quite the opposite. I've been noticing your work, and I wanted to tell you that you do an excellent job. You pay attention to details that most people miss. The supply closets, the organization, the way you arrange everything so thoughtfully. It doesn't go unnoticed." Maria felt a flutter of surprise. In 6 months of working at Richardson Tech, no executive had ever acknowledged her presence beyond complaints or dismissive comments. She had begun to wonder if she was truly invisible to the people who would soon be her employees. "Thank you, sir," she said carefully. "I try to do good work." "You do more than good work," Marcus continued. "You take pride in what you do, and that's increasingly rare these days. I wanted to ask you something, and I hope you don't mind." The question: have you ever thought about doing something different, something beyond cleaning? The question hit Maria like a lightning bolt. This was the moment she had been unconsciously waiting for, the first time someone in the company had seen her as more than just a uniform and a mop. She struggled to formulate a response that would maintain her cover while exploring where this conversation might lead. I do what I can do," she said slowly. "English not so good for office work." Marcus leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been in business for 15 years, and I've learned that intelligence comes in many forms. I've seen people with fancy degrees who couldn't organize a filing cabinet, and I've seen janitors who understood business better than some executives. What matters isn't where you start, it's how willing you are to learn and grow." Maria felt tears threatening to form in her eyes. This man, who had no idea who she really was offering her the kind of respect and recognition she had craved throughout this entire experience. He was seeing her potential without knowing her credentials, valuing her character without understanding her background. "Why you tell me this?" she asked, genuinely curious about his motivations. "Because I believe in people," Marcus replied simply. "And because this company is about to go through some big changes. We're getting a new CEO today. Actually, David Richardson's granddaughter is taking over, and from what I understand, she believes in promoting from within, in recognizing talent wherever it exists." Maria's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Marcus could hear it. He was talking about her, describing her philosophy and values to her face without knowing it. The irony was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Maybe, Marcus continued, when things settle down with the new leadership, you might consider applying for a different position. Administrative assistant, perhaps, or facilities coordinator. Something that would let you use that attention to detail in a broader way. You think I could do office work? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I think you could do anything you set your mind to, Marcus said with conviction. And I think this new CEO, if she's as smart as people say she is, would be lucky to have someone like you on her team. The moment hung between them like a bridge spanning two different worlds. Maria realized that this conversation was giving her something she had never expected to find during her time undercover. She was discovering what kind of leader she wanted to be, what kind of company she wanted to build. Marcus Thompson was showing her the importance of seeing potential in every person, of recognizing that talent and intelligence weren't limited to corner offices and expensive suits. Can I ask you something, Mr. Thompson? Maria said, having noticed his name on various company directories during her cleaning rounds. Marcus looked surprised that she knew his name, but nodded encouragingly. What you think about new CEO? People say she's spoiled rich girl who never work real job. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. I think people judge too quickly sometimes. Yes, she's had advantages that most of us haven't had. But I've read about her background, her education, her work experience before coming here. She's not just some trust fund kid playing at business. She has real qualifications, real experience. And you know what gives me the most hope? What? Maria asked, hanging on every word. Her grandfather, David Richardson, was one of the most ethical businessmen I've ever known. He built this company on the principle that every employee matters, that innovation comes from listening to people at every level of the organization. If he chose her as his successor, if he trusted her with his life's work, then I believe she must have those same values. Maria felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She had worried constantly about living up to her grandfather's legacy, about whether she could fill the enormous shoes he had left behind. Hearing this assessment from someone who didn't know her true identity was incredibly reassuring. But what if she fire everyone? Maria asked, voicing the concerns she had heard from Jennifer and her friends the night before. Then she proved that people's worst assumptions about her were correct, Marcus replied. But I don't think that's going to happen. Change is scary, especially when it comes from someone we don't know. But sometimes change is exactly what an organization needs to reach its full potential. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other early employees. Marcus glanced at his watch and realized he needed to prepare for the morning's executive meetings. But before he left, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. This is my direct number, he said, handing it to Maria. When you're ready to think about your next step, give me a call. I'd be happy to help you navigate the application process, maybe even put in a good word for you with the right people. Maria took the card with trembling hands. Why you help me? You don't know me. Because everyone deserves a chance to succeed, Marcus said simply, and because I have a feeling about you. There's something special there, something more than what meets the eye. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts about people. As Marcus walked away, Maria stared at the business card in her hands. In a few hours, she would be sitting across from this man in a boardroom, revealing her true identity and taking control of the company. But this conversation had given her something more valuable than any business degree or family connection ever could. It had shown her what real leadership looked like, what it meant to see potential in others and invest in their success. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Maria finished her cleaning duties with extra care, knowing it would be the last time she would push a mop through these halls. She had grown attached to the routine, to the quiet hours of observation and reflection that had taught her so much about herself and her company. At 7 in the morning, she clocked out for the final time and walked to her car. In 3 hours, she would return to this building as Maria Santos Richardson, CEO of Richardson Tech Industries. But she would never forget the lessons she had learned as Maria, the cleaning lady, or the man who had seen her worth when she was invisible to everyone else. The transformation began in her apartment, a modest one-bedroom space she had rented in a working-class neighborhood to maintain her cover. Maria had deliberately chosen to live far from her usual social circle, far from the upscale areas where she might be recognized. For 6 months, this small space had been her sanctuary, the place where she could drop the pretense and be herself. Now, as she stood before her closet, selecting the outfit that would mark her return to her real life, Maria felt the weight of everything she had learned. The navy blue Armani suit hanging before her represented power, authority, success. But the simple cleaning uniform crumpled in her laundry basket represented something equally important: humility, understanding, and connection to the people who would be depending on her leadership. She chose her accessories carefully. Her grandmother's pearl earrings, a gift from her grandfather when she graduated from Harvard. The watch he had given her for her 21st birthday, inscribed with the words, "Time is our most precious resource, use it wisely." And finally, she pinned a small flag pin to her lapel, representing both her Mexican heritage and her American dreams, a reminder of the diverse workforce she would soon be leading. As she applied her makeup and styled her hair, Maria thought about the conversation with Marcus Thompson. His belief in her potential, his willingness to mentor someone he thought was just a cleaning lady, had revealed the kind of culture she wanted to create at Richardson Tech. She wanted to build an organization where every person felt valued, where talent was recognized regardless of title or background, where leadership meant service rather than superiority. The drive back to Richardson Tech felt surreal. Maria had made this journey hundreds of times in her modest Honda, arriving before dawn to clean the offices of people who never saw her as anything more than part of the furniture. Today she drove her BMW, arriving as the building came to life, with the energy of a new workday beginning. She parked in the executive garage, using the key card that had been waiting for her at her grandfather's lawyer's office. As she walked through the marble lobby in her designer heels, Maria noticed how different everything looked from this perspective. The security guards, who had barely acknowledged her existence during her night shifts, now nodded respectfully, recognizing her as someone important even though they had never seen her before. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave her a few final moments to prepare mentally for what was about to happen. In 30 minutes, she would walk into a boardroom full of people who had worked with her grandfather for years, people who would be expecting to meet a spoiled rich girl with no understanding of their business. Instead, they would encounter someone who had spent 6 months learning their company from the ground up, someone who understood the challenges and opportunities better than they could imagine. But more than that, they would meet someone who had been transformed by the experience of being invisible, of being dismissed and underestimated, of discovering the dignity and intelligence that existed at every level of their organization. Maria Santos Richardson was ready to take her place as CEO, not just because of her name or her education, but because she had earned the right to lead through service, observation, and genuine understanding of what it meant to be human in a corporate world that often forgot the humanity of its employees. The boardroom doors waited ahead of her, beyond which lay her destiny. But Maria was no longer the same person who had entered this building 6 months ago. She had been tested, humbled, and ultimately strengthened by an experience that would shape every decision she made as a leader. The real work was just beginning, but she was ready to prove that true leadership came not from looking down on others, but from understanding their struggles and lifting them up. As she reached for the door handle, Maria thought one more time. About Marcus Thompson and the kindness he had shown to someone he thought was just a cleaning lady. In a few minutes, she would have the opportunity to show him and everyone else what real leadership looked like. The girl who had been laughed at for mopping floors was about to become the woman whose name would grace every piece of company letterhead, and she would never forget the journey that had brought her to this moment. The mahogany doors of the Richardson Tech boardroom opened with a soft whisper, and Maria Santos Richardson stepped into her destiny. 24 pairs of eyes turned toward her as she entered, and the immediate silence that followed was so complete she could hear the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. The massive conference table stretched before her like a bridge between her past and her future, surrounded by the executives, department heads, and board members who would shape the company's direction under her leadership. At the head of the table sat her grandfather's chair, empty since his passing 3 months ago, waiting for her to claim it. But first, she had to navigate the maze of expectations, assumptions, and barely concealed skepticism that filled the room like morning fog. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Thomas Bradley, the company's chief legal counsel and executor of her grandfather's estate, "I'm pleased to introduce Maria Santos Richardson, your new chief executive officer and majority shareholder of Richardson Tech Industries." The polite applause that followed felt forced, mechanical, like the sound of duty rather than enthusiasm. Maria scanned the faces around the table, recognizing some from her months of observation. There was Dr. Patricia Hernandez, head of research and development, whose innovative work on artificial intelligence had kept the company at the forefront of technological advancement. Next to her sat Robert Chun, chief financial officer, whose careful stewardship of company resources had maintained Richardson Tech's stability through market volatility. And there, halfway down the table, was Marcus Thompson, his kind eyes showing recognition and confusion as he tried to reconcile the polished executive before him with the humble cleaning woman he had spoken to just hours earlier. His face was a canvas of dawning realization, painted with emotions that shifted from surprise to understanding to something that might have been admiration. "Thank you all for welcoming me this morning," Maria began, her voice carrying the authority that came from months of preparation and a lifetime of education. "I know many of you have questions about my qualifications, my vision for the company, and my ability to fill my grandfather's considerable shoes. I'm here to address those concerns directly and honestly." She moved to the presentation screen at the front of the room, where Thomas had prepared a detailed overview of her background and credentials. With a click of the remote, her educational achievements appeared: Harvard Business School, MIT, London School of Economics. The murmurs of surprise were audible now, as people realized this was not the unprepared heiress they had been expecting. "But education alone doesn't make a leader," Maria continued, advancing to the next slide, which showed her work experience with major consulting firms across 3 continents. "For the past 5 years, I've been working with Fortune 500 companies to solve complex operational challenges, improve efficiency, and drive innovation. I've helped organizations navigate digital transformation, optimize supply chains, and develop strategies for sustainable growth." Jennifer Walsh, who had been laughing at Maria's mopping technique just 12 hours earlier, leaned forward in her chair. Something about the new CEO's voice seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. The accent she remembered from the cleaning lady was completely gone, replaced by the crisp, articulate speech of someone clearly educated at the highest levels. "However," Maria said, pausing for effect, "the most valuable education I've received about this company didn't come from any classroom or consultant engagement. It came from spending the last 6 months working among you, learning your challenges firsthand, and understanding what Richardson Tech really is at its core." The confusion in the room was palpable now. Several board members exchanged glances, unsure what she meant by working among them. Robert Chun cleared his throat and spoke up. I'm sorry, Ms. Richardson, but I'm not sure I understand. Our records show you've been living in London until very recently. How could you have been working here for 6 months? Maria smiled, and in that smile was the memory of every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment she had been treated as invisible. That's an excellent question, Robert. Let me show you exactly what I mean. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a photograph of the Richardson Tech night cleaning crew. There, in the back row, wearing the same navy blue uniform that had marked her as invisible to so many, was Maria herself. The collective gasp that filled the room was followed by a silence so profound it seemed to echo. For the past 6 months, I've been working the night shift as part of our cleaning crew. I've mopped these floors, cleaned these offices, and emptied your trash cans while observing how this company really operates when the executives think no one important is watching. Marcus Thompson's face had gone completely pale. The woman he had encouraged to apply for a better position, the humble cleaning lady he had offered to mentor, was now revealed as the most powerful person in the building. The kindness he had shown her hadn't been charity offered to someone beneath his station. It had been human decency offered to someone who could now determine his entire future. "Why would you do such a thing?" demanded Amanda Chen from Human Resources, her voice sharp with what might have been fear or indignation. "That's completely inappropriate. Spying on your own employees, deceiving us about your identity. We have privacy rights, professional dignity." "Do you, Amanda?" Maria asked, her voice remaining calm but carrying a new edge. "Because 6 months ago, you processed my employment application for the cleaning crew. You looked at my fabricated resume, my false references, and you approved me for a position paying minimum wage with no benefits. Did you think that person had dignity then? Did you consider her privacy rights when she was invisible to you?" Amanda's face flushed red as the implications of Maria's words sank in. Every interaction she had ever had with the cleaning staff was now being viewed through a different lens, examined by someone who had experienced that treatment firsthand. "I think what Ms. Richardson is describing," interrupted Dr. Hernandez, her scientific mind already working to understand the methodology behind Maria's approach, "is a form of ethnographic research. Participant observation to understand organizational culture from the ground up. It's actually quite brilliant, though ethically complex." "Ethically complex is an understatement," snapped Jennifer Walsh, finally finding her voice. "This is corporate espionage. You violated our trust, manipulated our interactions, and created false relationships. How are we supposed to work with someone who starts their tenure with such massive deception?" Maria looked directly at Jennifer, and in her eyes was the memory of the laughter echoing through marble corridors, the mocking comments about limited options and simple jobs. "False relationships, Jennifer? Let me ask you this. When you saw me mopping these floors last night, did you treat me with the same respect you're showing me now? When you took pictures of me cleaning to share on social media for your amusement, was that relationship authentic?" The color drained from Jennifer's face as she realized her late-night encounter with the cleaning lady was being referenced by the new CEO. The photos she had posted, the comments she had made, the laughter she had shared with her colleagues, all of it had been witnessed and remembered by the person who now controlled her career trajectory. "The truth is," Maria continued, addressing the entire room now, "my grandfather's will required this experience as a condition of my inheritance. But it taught me something far more valuable than any business school ever could. It showed me who we really are as an organization when we think no one important is watching." She clicked to another slide, this one showing productivity metrics, employee satisfaction surveys, and turnover rates from different departments. "What I learned during my 6 months of observation was that some of you treat every employee with dignity and respect, regardless of their position. Others of you have created toxic environments where people feel undervalued and invisible." Marcus Thompson felt his heart racing as he waited to see which category he would fall into. The conversation he had shared with Maria that morning now seemed like a test he hadn't known he was taking, a measure of his character when he thought there were no consequences for his actions. "Marcus," Maria said, turning to face him directly, "you offered to help someone you thought was a cleaning lady advance her career. You saw potential where others saw only a uniform. You treated me with kindness and respect when you had nothing to gain from it. That's the kind of leadership this company needs more of." The relief on Marcus's face was visible to everyone in the room, but Maria wasn't finished. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed breakdown of employee complaints, mostly centered around 3 specific departments. "However," she continued, "I also witnessed behavior that has no place in this organization. I heard conversations about workers being grateful for any opportunity because of their perceived limitations. I listened to executives mock employees they considered beneath them. I watched people take photos of workers for social media entertainment." Jennifer Walsh was now visibly trembling, understanding that her career was likely over. Amanda Chun was staring at her hands, unable to meet Maria's gaze. Sarah Mitchell, who had been notably quiet since Maria's revelation, finally spoke up. "What you did was entrapment," she said defensively. "You put us in situations where we couldn't possibly know we were being judged by our future boss. It's not fair to hold us accountable for private conversations we had when we thought we were talking to a peer." "A peer?" Maria repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Sarah, you took pictures of me working and posted them online with mocking comments. You called me a character for your followers to laugh at. When exactly did you consider me a peer? When did any of you treat the cleaning staff as peers?" The room fell silent again as the full scope of what had happened began to sink in. Maria had created the ultimate test of character, observing how people behaved when they thought there were no consequences, when they believed they were interacting with someone who couldn't affect their careers or status. "But this experience taught me something else," Maria said, her tone softening slightly. "It showed me that change is possible, that growth is achievable, and that everyone deserves a second chance to prove they can do better." She clicked to a new slide titled "Moving Forward Together," and the atmosphere in the room shifted slightly as people realized this might not be the wholesale firing they had feared. "I'm not here to punish anyone for past behavior," Maria continued. "I'm here to build a company culture where everyone feels valued, where innovation comes from all levels of the organization, and where respect is shown to every employee regardless of their title or background." Dr. Hernandez raised her hand tentatively. "What does that mean practically? How do we move forward from this situation?" "It means we start with honesty and accountability," Maria replied. "Everyone in this room will have the opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to creating a more inclusive, respectful workplace. Some of you have already shown me you have the character to lead that change. Others will need to prove they can adapt to new expectations." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present. "This company was built on the principle that every employee matters. My grandfather believed that innovation and success come from creating an environment where everyone can contribute their best work. That's the culture we're going to rebuild together." Robert Chun, who had remained quiet throughout most of the presentation, finally spoke up. "Ms. Richardson, I have to ask, how do we trust each other moving forward? You've revealed that our interactions over the past 6 months weren't what we thought they were. How do we establish authentic relationships when this experience started with deception?" It was a fair question, and Maria had been expecting it. "Trust is earned through actions, not words, Robert. You'll have to judge my leadership by what I do going forward, just as I'll continue to evaluate all of you based on how you choose to behave, now that you know what kind of leader I want to be." Marcus Thompson raised his hand, and Maria nodded for him to speak. "I want to say something to everyone here," he began, his voice slightly shaky with emotion. This morning, I had a conversation with someone I thought was a cleaning lady. I offered to help her find a better position because I saw something special in her work ethic and attention to detail. Now I discover that person was our new CEO. He paused, looking around the room at his colleagues. But here's what I want you all to understand. My offer wasn't charity or condescension. It was recognition of talent and potential. And if we can't see those qualities in every employee, regardless of their current position, then we're failing as leaders. His words hung in the air like a challenge to everyone present. Maria felt a surge of gratitude toward this man who had shown her kindness when he believed she needed it most, who was now using his experience to teach the same lesson to others. Marcus is absolutely right, Maria said. True leadership means seeing potential everywhere and creating opportunities for people to grow. Over the next few weeks, I'll be meeting with each of you individually to discuss your roles, your departments, and your vision for Richardson Tech's future. She clicked to the final slide of her presentation, which showed a quote from her grandfather. The measure of a company's success is not just in its profits, but in how it treats the people who make those profits possible. We're going to build something special here, Maria concluded. A company that succeeds not just because of what we create, but because of how we treat each other while creating it. This experience has shown me both the challenges we face and the potential we have to overcome them. As the meeting came to an end, people began filing out of the boardroom with varying expressions of shock, reflection, and determination. Some, like Marcus Thompson, left with renewed purpose and understanding. Others, like Jennifer Walsh and Amanda Chen, left with the heavy knowledge that their actions had consequences they had never considered. Maria remained at the head of the table. As the room emptied, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline her grandfather had helped shape. The view from this office was magnificent, but it was no more beautiful than the perspective she had gained from mopping the floors below. Both vantage points had taught her something essential about leadership, about humanity, and about the responsibility that came with power. The real work was just beginning, but Maria Santos Richardson was ready for the challenge. She had been tested by invisibility and emerged with clarity, strengthened by humility and prepared to lead with both wisdom and compassion. The woman who had been laughed at for pushing a mop was now the CEO whose name would appear on every company letterhead, and she would never forget the journey that had brought her to this moment of truth. 3 months after the boardroom revelation that shook Richardson Tech to its core, the transformation was undeniable. Maria Santos Richardson stood in the same executive break room where Marcus Thompson had first offered to mentor a humble cleaning lady, but everything about the space had changed. The sterile corporate environment had been replaced with comfortable seating areas, a community bulletin board where employees shared achievements and ideas, and a coffee station that had become an unexpected hub for cross-departmental collaboration. The real change, however, wasn't in the furniture or decor. It was in the people who filled these spaces, the conversations that echoed through the halls, and the energy that pulsed through every floor of the building. Maria had kept her promise to rebuild the company culture from the ground up, and the results were exceeding even her most optimistic projections. She walked through the offices now with the confidence of someone who had earned her position twice over, first through education and experience, then through the humbling journey of understanding her company from its foundation. Employees no longer averted their eyes when she passed. Instead, they offered genuine smiles and often stopped to share ideas or concerns directly with her. The invisible barriers that had once separated management from staff had been systematically dismantled. "Good morning, Mrs. Richardson," called out Elena Vasquez, one of the night cleaning crew members who had worked alongside Maria during her months undercover. Elena now held the position of facilities coordinator, a new role Maria had created to ensure that the insights and perspectives of service workers were integrated into company operations. "Elena, How are the new training programs going? Maria asked, genuinely interested in the answer. She had learned that authentic leadership required authentic interest in every employee's success. Incredible, Elena replied, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. Yesterday, Tommy from maintenance shared an idea for improving our energy efficiency that could save the company thousands of dollars annually. 6 months ago, no one would have listened to him. Now he's presenting to the Sustainability Committee next week. This was exactly the kind of transformation Maria had envisioned. Tommy Rodriguez had been working maintenance at Richardson Tech for 8 years, quietly observing inefficiencies and developing solutions that no one had bothered to ask about. Under the old system, his insights would have died in the basement, workshops where he spent his days. Under Maria's new leadership structure, every employee was seen as a potential source of innovation. The elevator arrived, and Maria stepped in with several other employees, including Dr. Patricia Hernandez from Research and Development. The informal mixing of management levels in shared spaces was another deliberate change Maria had implemented. No more executive elevators, no more segregated dining areas, no more physical symbols of hierarchy that reinforced psychological barriers. Maria, I wanted to update you on the Johnson project, Dr. Hernandez said as they rode up together. The cross-functional team approach you suggested is working brilliantly. We've made more progress in 3 months than we had in the previous year. The Johnson project was an artificial intelligence initiative that had been stagnating under the traditional departmental structure. Maria had reassigned it to a diverse team that included not just engineers and programmers, but also customer service representatives who understood user needs, facility workers who had insights into practical applications, and administrative staff who brought fresh perspectives to problem solving. What made the difference? Maria asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The customer service team identified user interface issues that our engineers had completely missed. Dr. Hernandez explained. And Melissa from accounting suggested a data organization method that streamlined our entire development process. We were so focused on technical complexity that we overlooked simple solutions. As they reached the executive floor, Maria reflected on how this small conversation exemplified the larger transformation taking place at Richardson Tech. Innovation wasn't coming from the top down anymore. It was emerging from every corner of the organization as people felt empowered to contribute their unique perspectives and experiences. Her first meeting of the day was with Marcus Thompson, who had become not just her head of operations, but also her closest advisor and friend within the company. Their relationship had evolved from the moment of mutual respect they shared over a conversation about potential, and Marcus had proven himself to be the kind of leader Maria wanted to cultivate throughout the organization. The quarterly numbers are in, Marcus said as she entered the conference room, his smile telling her everything she needed to know before he spoke the details. Revenue is up 18%, employee satisfaction scores have reached an all-time high, and we've reduced turnover by 47%. Maria felt a surge of pride, not just in the financial success, but in what those numbers represented. Higher employee satisfaction meant people felt valued and heard. Reduced turnover meant the company was retaining institutional knowledge and building stronger teams. The revenue growth was almost a side effect of creating an environment where people could do their best work. The real story is in the innovation. Metrics, Marcus continued, pulling up detailed charts on his laptop. We've received over 300 improvement suggestions from employees in the past quarter, compared to 12 in the same period last year. More importantly, we've implemented 68% of those suggestions, and they've resulted in measurable improvements to efficiency, customer satisfaction, and profitability. What about the resistance? Maria asked. Not everyone was thrilled about the changes we implemented. Marcus's expression grew more serious. We did have some departures. Jennifer Walsh submitted her resignation 6 weeks ago, citing incompatibility with the new corporate culture. Amanda Chen requested a transfer to our Phoenix office, where she could start fresh under a different management structure. Maria nodded thoughtfully. She had anticipated that some employees would choose to leave rather than adapt to an environment that demanded greater accountability and respect for all workers. While she regretted losing their institutional knowledge, she understood that meaningful change sometimes required difficult transitions. "What about Sarah Mitchell?" Maria asked about the third member of the group that had mocked her that night in the corridor. "Sarah has surprised everyone," Marcus replied with a genuine smile. "She requested a meeting with you last month, and since then she's become one of our strongest advocates for inclusive leadership. She's been mentoring junior staff members and has completely transformed her approach to management." This was the kind of outcome Maria had hoped for but hadn't dared to expect. People were capable of growth and change when given clear expectations and genuine opportunities to succeed. Sarah's transformation proved that the punitive approach she could have taken would have been less effective than the developmental approach she had chosen instead. Their meeting was interrupted by a knock on the door. Maria's assistant, David Kim, entered with an expression of barely contained excitement. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She says it's about a story she's writing for Forbes magazine." Maria exchanged glances with Marcus. The media attention had been building steadily as word spread about Richardson Tech's unconventional leadership transition and remarkable performance improvements. She had been expecting this kind of inquiry, but she still felt nervous about how her story would be portrayed to the broader business community. "Send her in," Maria said, straightening her jacket and preparing to represent not just herself but also the thousands of employees who had embraced the changes she had implemented. Rebecca Chen, the Forbes journalist, was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who radiated the kind of intelligence that came from years of investigating corporate America's successes and failures. She settled into her chair with the ease of someone who had interviewed hundreds of executives, but Maria sensed that this story was different for her. "Ms. Richardson, your company's performance over the past few months has caught the attention of business leaders across the country," Rebecca began, her recorder placed prominently between them. "But I'm not here just to talk about financial metrics. I'm here because your approach to leadership challenges some fundamental assumptions about corporate hierarchy and employee engagement." Maria leaned forward, recognizing an opportunity to share the lessons she had learned with a broader audience. "What specific assumptions are you referring to?" "The idea that workers need to be managed rather than empowered," Rebecca replied. "The belief that innovation comes primarily from highly educated specialists rather than from diverse perspectives. The assumption that respect is something earned through position rather than something given to every human being." These were exactly the principles Maria had been working to overturn, and hearing them articulated by an outside observer confirmed that her efforts were having impact beyond Richardson Tech's walls. "6 months ago, I thought I understood leadership," Maria said carefully. "I had the degrees, the experience, the family legacy. But I discovered that true leadership isn't about having the right credentials or sitting in the corner office. It's about seeing the potential in every person and creating conditions where that potential can flourish." Rebecca nodded, making notes. "I understand you spent time working in different roles within the company before taking over as CEO. Can you tell me about that experience?" Maria had been preparing for this question, knowing that her undercover months would be a central part of any story about her leadership style. She had decided to be completely honest about the experience while focusing on the lessons learned, rather than the specific individuals who had treated her poorly. "I worked for 6 months as part of our night cleaning crew," Maria said simply. "It was a requirement of my grandfather's will, but it became the most valuable education I've ever received. I learned what it feels like to be invisible in your own workplace, to have your intelligence dismissed because of your uniform, to be treated as less than human because of your job title. That must have been difficult, Rebecca observed. It was transformative, Maria corrected. It showed me that every organization has untapped potential in every employee, but that potential can only be realized when people feel seen, valued, and heard. The janitor who notices inefficiencies during night shifts, the receptionist who understands customer concerns better than anyone in the C-suite, the maintenance worker who has ideas for cost-saving innovations. Their insights are invaluable, but only if leadership is humble enough to listen. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, clearly impressed by the depth of thought behind Maria's approach. Your critics might argue that what you did was deceptive, that you manipulated employees' interactions with you during those months. My critics would be right that deception was involved, Maria acknowledged. But the real deception was the one our industry has been perpetuating for decades. The lie that some work is more valuable than other work, that some people matter more than others, that respect is a privilege to be earned rather than a right to be given. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from specific policy changes Maria had implemented to the broader implications of her leadership philosophy for corporate America. Rebecca asked about the financial results, the employee satisfaction improvements, and the innovation metrics that had caught the attention of business analysts. But the question that stayed with Maria long after the interview ended was Rebecca's final one. What do you want other leaders to learn from your experience? I want them to understand that leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room, Maria had replied. It's about creating a room where everyone feels smart enough to contribute. The moment you start treating any employee as invisible or unimportant, you're losing access to perspectives and ideas that could transform your organization. 3 weeks later, when the Forbes article hit newsstands and websites across the country, Maria was overwhelmed by the response. The headline read, "The CEO Who Cleaned Floors, How Maria Richardson is Revolutionizing Corporate Leadership." But more than the positive press coverage, she was moved by the hundreds of emails she received from employees at other companies who felt inspired to speak up with their own ideas and perspectives. The article had sparked a broader conversation about leadership, respect, and the untapped potential that exists in every organization. Business schools began incorporating Maria's approach into their leadership curricula. Other companies started implementing similar programs to break down hierarchical barriers and encourage innovation from all levels. But the most meaningful response came from her own employees. On the day the article was published, Maria arrived at work to find the lobby filled with flowers, cards, and handwritten notes from people throughout the organization. Elena Vasquez had coordinated the effort, but the messages came from every department, every shift, every level of the company. Tommy Rodriguez from maintenance had written, "Thank you for seeing us as more than our job titles. For the first time in my career, I feel like my ideas matter." Dr. Patricia Hernandez had contributed, "You've shown us that true innovation comes from bringing diverse minds together with mutual respect." Even Sarah Mitchell, who had undergone her own transformation, had added, "You taught me that leadership means lifting others up, not looking down on them." As Maria read through the messages, she realized that her grandfather's will had accomplished exactly what he had intended. The requirement to work at every level of the company hadn't just prepared her to be a better CEO. It had transformed her into the kind of leader who could transform others. The journey from invisible cleaning lady to visible CEO had taught her that true power came not from position or authority, but from the ability to see potential in others and create conditions where that potential could flourish. She had learned that respect wasn't something to be earned through status, but something to be given freely to every human being. 6 months earlier, Maria Santos Richardson had been a qualified candidate for CEO with impressive credentials and family connections. Today, She was a transformational leader whose impact extended far beyond her own company's walls. The woman who had been laughed at for mopping floors had become a symbol of what was possible when leaders chose humility over hierarchy. When they valued character over credentials, when they understood that the most important lessons about leadership often came from the ground up. As she sat in her grandfather's chair that evening, looking out at the city skyline that twinkled with possibilities, Maria smiled. Her name was indeed on every piece of company letterhead now, but more importantly, her values were embedded in every interaction, every decision, and every relationship within Richardson Tech Industries. The real victory wasn't in proving the doubters wrong or in achieving financial success. It was in creating a workplace where every employee felt valued, where innovation flourished at every level, and where respect was the foundation of every interaction. She had transformed not just a company, but a culture, and in doing so, she had discovered that the most powerful leadership tool was also the simplest, treating every person with dignity, regardless of their position, their background, or the work they did to make a living. The girl who had cleaned floors had become the woman who elevated everyone around her, and that transformation would inspire leaders for generations to come. 1 year later, Maria Santos Richardson stood before the largest gathering of business leaders in Chicago's history, but this time she wasn't cleaning up after them. The International Leadership Summit had invited her as the keynote speaker, and the audience of 2,000 executives, entrepreneurs, and business students hung on her every word as she shared the revolutionary approach that had transformed not just Richardson Tech, but the very definition of corporate leadership. Leadership is not about the view from the top, Maria said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. It's about understanding the view from every level, especially the levels that traditional business thinking considers insignificant. In the front row sat Elena Vasquez, now Richardson Tech's Director of Employee Innovation, a position that hadn't existed before Maria's transformation of the company. Beside her was Tommy Rodriguez, whose energy-saving suggestions had evolved into a comprehensive sustainability program that was saving the company millions while reducing their environmental impact. These weren't just success stories. They were proof that potential existed everywhere, waiting for leaders brave enough to recognize and nurture it. The past 12 months had brought changes that even Maria hadn't anticipated. Richardson Tech's revolutionary approach to inclusive leadership had attracted attention from universities, government agencies, and corporations around the world. The company had become a case study in business schools, a model for organizational development, consultants, and a beacon of hope for millions of workers who had felt invisible in their own workplaces. But the real measure of success wasn't in the accolades or media attention. It was in the letters Maria received daily from employees at other companies who had been inspired to speak up, to share their ideas, to demand better treatment from their own leadership. The ripple effect of her story was creating waves of change across industries and continents. 6 months ago, I received a letter from a janitor in Tokyo. Maria continued, clicking to a slide that showed a photograph of Hiroshi Tanaka, a soft-spoken man in his 50s. He had been working the night shift at a major technology company for 15 years, quietly observing inefficiencies in their manufacturing process. After reading about our approach at Richardson Tech, he found the courage to share his observations with management. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the universal nature of the story. His suggestions led to a 23% improvement in production efficiency and earned him a promotion to process improvement specialist. But more importantly, his courage inspired his company to create formal channels for all employees to contribute ideas regardless of their position or department. This was happening everywhere. In São Paulo, a housekeeping supervisor had revolutionized hospital sanitation protocols. In Mumbai, a security guard's observations about customer behavior had led to a retail redesign that increased sales by 30%. In London, a cafeteria worker's suggestions about meal planning had improved employee nutrition and reduced food waste by 40%. The stories kept coming because Maria had proven something that corporate America had forgotten. Every person who shows up to work brings intelligence, creativity, and valuable perspectives. The challenge wasn't finding innovation. It was creating environments where innovation could be shared and implemented. The transformation at Richardson Tech didn't happen overnight, Maria explained, advancing to a timeline that showed the careful, deliberate changes they had implemented. We started with listening sessions where employees at every level could share their experiences and suggestions without fear of retribution. We established cross-functional teams that mixed departments and hierarchy levels. We created mentorship programs that went both ways, with executives learning from frontline workers as much as they shared their own expertise. In the audience, Dr. Patricia Hernandez smiled as she remembered the initial skepticism that had greeted these changes. Many senior employees had worried that flattening hierarchies would lead to chaos and inefficiency. Instead, it had unleashed a creativity and collaboration that had accelerated innovation beyond anything they had experienced under the traditional top-down structure. Marcus Thompson, now Chief Operations Officer and Maria's closest advisor, had documented every step of the transformation process. His detailed analysis had become a blueprint that dozens of other companies were adapting to their own cultures and industries. The Richardson model, as business journals had dubbed it, wasn't just about treating employees better. It was about recognizing that sustainable success required tapping into the full intellectual capacity of every person in the organization. But perhaps the most important lesson we learned, Maria said, her voice growing more personal, is that leadership development can't be confined to corner offices and executive training programs. Some of our most effective leaders emerged from unexpected places. She clicked to a new slide showing Sarah Mitchell, the former finance executive who had once mocked Maria's mopping technique. Sarah now ran Richardson Tech's Leadership Development Institute, a program that identified and nurtured leadership potential throughout the organization. Her transformation from someone who looked down on service workers to someone who actively developed their leadership skills had become one of the most powerful examples of personal growth within the company. Sarah teaches us that people can change when given clear expectations, genuine support, and opportunities to grow beyond their past mistakes, Maria explained. She went from being part of the problem to becoming part of the solution, and her journey has inspired countless others to examine their own biases and behaviors. The Leadership Development Institute had become Richardson Tech's most requested consulting service. Companies around the world were sending their executives to learn not just about inclusive management techniques, but about the personal transformation required to become leaders who could see and develop potential in every employee. But Maria's proudest achievement wasn't the consulting revenue or the international recognition. It was the culture they had built within Richardson Tech itself, a culture that had proven sustainable and scalable as the company continued to grow and evolve. Today, Richardson Tech employs over 8,000 people across 12 countries. Maria shared, displaying a world map that showed their global expansion. In every location, we've implemented the same fundamental principle. Every employee, regardless of their role, has valuable insights that can improve our operations, serve our customers better, and drive innovation. This global expansion had provided the ultimate test of whether their leadership philosophy could transcend cultural and linguistic barriers. The results had exceeded even Maria's optimistic projections. In their Berlin office, a cleaning supervisor had identified security vulnerabilities that had led to a complete overhaul of their cybersecurity protocols. In their São Paulo facility, a cafeteria manager had suggested customer service improvements that had increased client satisfaction by 45%. The universality of their success proved that the hunger for recognition Respect and opportunity existed in every culture, every industry, and every level of every organization. People wanted to contribute meaningfully to something larger than themselves. They just needed leaders who were wise enough to listen and brave enough to act on what they heard. But transformation isn't just about business metrics. Maria continued, advancing to a slide that showed employee testimonials from around the world. It's about human dignity, about creating workplaces where people feel valued for who they are, not just what they produce. She read from a letter written by Ahmed Hassan, a maintenance worker at their Dubai office. For 20 years, I have worked in buildings where I was invisible. At Richardson Tech, I am seen, heard, and respected. My children ask me about my job now because they see how proud I am to work here. This was the impact that mattered most to Maria. Beyond the financial success, beyond the industry recognition, beyond the consulting contracts and speaking engagements, was the simple fact that thousands of people now went to work each day feeling valued and empowered. The presentation continued with detailed case studies, implementation strategies, and measurable outcomes that provided the business audience with practical tools they could adapt to their own organizations. But Maria knew that the real power of her message wasn't in the methodologies or metrics. It was in the fundamental shift in perspective that occurred when leaders stopped looking down and started looking around. During the question and answer session that followed, a young entrepreneur from California raised her hand. Ms. Richardson, how do you respond to critics who say your approach is idealistic, that it works at Richardson Tech because of your unique circumstances but wouldn't be practical in other industries or competitive environments? Maria smiled. Having anticipated this question, I would invite those critics to examine our results. In the past year, Richardson Tech has outperformed our competitors in every major metric: revenue growth, customer satisfaction, employee retention, innovation, pipeline, and market share expansion. Treating people with dignity and respect isn't idealistic. It's strategic. She clicked to a comprehensive comparison chart that showed Richardson Tech's performance against industry benchmarks. When people feel valued and empowered, they do better work. When they do better work, customers are happier. When customers are happier, businesses are more successful. It's not complicated, it's just uncommon. A senior executive from a Fortune 500 company asked about scalability. How do you maintain this culture as you grow? How do you ensure that new managers and employees understand and embrace these principles? Culture isn't something you install like software, Maria replied. It's something you model, reinforce, and protect every single day. Every hiring decision, every promotion, every policy change, every interaction between managers and employees either strengthens or weakens your culture. She explained Richardson Tech's comprehensive onboarding process, which included not just technical training, but immersive experiences designed to help new employees understand the company's values. Every new hire, regardless of their level, spent time working alongside employees in different departments to gain appreciation for diverse perspectives and challenges. More importantly, every manager underwent training that included role-playing. Exercises where they experienced what it felt like to be dismissed, ignored, or treated as invisible. The empathy developed through these exercises wasn't theoretical, it was visceral and lasting. The questions continued for another hour, covering everything from specific implementation challenges to broader philosophical implications of inclusive leadership. But the question that resonated most deeply came from a young business student who asked simply, how do you find the courage to challenge systems that seem so entrenched and powerful? Maria paused, thinking back to that night in the Richardson Tech corridors when she had listened to colleagues mock her while she mopped their floors. The humiliation could have broken her spirit or hardened her heart. Instead, it had clarified her purpose and strengthened her resolve. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she replied. It's the recognition that some things are more important. Then fear. When you've experienced what it feels like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be treated as less than human, you understand that changing those systems isn't just a business opportunity. It's a moral imperative. She looked out at the audience of leaders, decision-makers, and future executives. Every person in this room has the power to create positive change in their organization. The question isn't whether you can make a difference. It's whether you will choose to make a difference. As the conference concluded and attendees began filing out of the auditorium, many approached Maria with business cards, partnership proposals, and invitations to speak at their own organizations. But the interaction that meant the most came from a young woman who introduced herself as Lisa Park, a recent college graduate who had just started working as an administrative assistant at a tech startup. "Ms. Richardson," Lisa said, her voice filled with determination, "I want to thank you for showing me that leadership isn't about waiting for permission or having the right title. Tomorrow, I'm going to start listening more carefully to my colleagues, especially the ones whose voices aren't usually heard in meetings." This was how change really happened, Maria realized. Not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through individual decisions to see differently, to listen more carefully, to treat every person with dignity and respect. Lisa Park would probably never give a keynote speech or write a business book, but her commitment to inclusive leadership would touch dozens of lives throughout her career. As Maria returned to her hotel that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 12 months ago, she had been a woman with impressive credentials but limited understanding of what leadership really meant. The experience of being invisible had taught her to see clearly, and that clarity had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of thousands of people who had never expected their voices to matter in corporate America. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Elena Vasquez. "Watched your speech online. You made us all proud today, but more importantly, you reminded the world that every person has value. Thank you for seeing us before we knew how to see ourselves." Maria smiled, knowing that this message captured the essence of what they had accomplished together. Richardson Tech's transformation hadn't been the work of one visionary leader. It had been the collective effort of thousands of people who had chosen to believe that they could create something better than what existed before. The next morning's newspaper carried a headline that would have seemed impossible just 18 months earlier: "Former cleaning lady named Business Leader of the Year." But Maria knew that the real victory wasn't in the awards or recognition. It was in the knowledge that somewhere in Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Mumbai, and dozens of other cities, janitors and security guards and cafeteria workers were finding the courage to speak up, to share their ideas, to demand the respect that every human being deserved. The woman who had been laughed at for mopping floors had become a catalyst for a global movement toward more inclusive, more humane leadership. Her name wasn't just on Richardson Tech's letterhead anymore. It was associated with a fundamental shift in how the business world understood power, potential, and the infinite value of every human being. As she prepared to board her flight back to Chicago, Maria carried with her the letters, business cards, and heartfelt thanks of hundreds of people who were committed to creating workplaces where everyone could thrive. The transformation was no longer confined to one company or one industry. It was spreading across continents and cultures, proving that the desire for dignity and respect was truly universal. The journey from invisible to influential had taught Maria that true leadership wasn't about rising above others. It was about lifting others up. And as she settled into her seat for the flight home, she knew that the most important work was still ahead, nurturing a generation of leaders who understood that the measure of their success would not be in what they accumulated for themselves, but in what they made possible for others. 5 years had passed since Maria Santos Richardson first revealed her true identity in that marble-walled boardroom, and the world of business had fundamentally changed. What began as one woman's journey from invisible cleaning lady to transformational CEO had evolved into a global movement that was rewriting the rules of corporate leadership across every industry imaginable. Maria stood in the newly constructed Richardson Leadership Institute, a state-of-the-art facility that welcomed over 10,000 visitors annually from corporations, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations around the world. The building itself embodied the principles she had fought to establish. The architect had been a former maintenance worker, whose design suggestions had been overlooked for years until Richardson Tech gave him the opportunity to lead the project. Today was special. Maria was preparing to welcome a delegation of CEOs from Japan's largest corporations, but she wasn't nervous about impressing them with presentations or financial projections. Instead, she was excited to show them something that couldn't be captured in spreadsheets or PowerPoint slides, a workplace where every human being was valued, where innovation flowed from every level, and where success was measured not just in profits but in the dignity and fulfillment of every employee. The delegation was led by Kenji Nakamura, CEO of Yamamoto Industries, one of Japan's most traditional and hierarchical companies. He had flown halfway around the world because his own company was facing a crisis that Richardson Tech had solved. Years earlier, talented employees were leaving faster than they could be replaced. Innovation had stagnated, and customer satisfaction was declining despite increased investment in technology and marketing. Richardson-san, Nakamura said through his translator as Maria greeted the group in the Institute's main lobby. "We have heard remarkable stories about your transformation methods, but many of my colleagues believe they cannot work in Japanese business culture. They say respect for hierarchy is too deeply embedded in our society." Maria smiled, remembering similar skepticism she had encountered from American executives who claimed their industries were too competitive, too regulated, or too traditional. For inclusive leadership approaches, every culture had its own reasons why change seemed impossible, but human nature remained remarkably consistent across all boundaries. "Nakamura-san, let me introduce you to someone who might help address those concerns," Maria said, gesturing toward a woman approaching them with confident steps and a warm smile. Dr. Yuki Sato had been Richardson Tech's Director of Asian Operations for 3 years, but her journey to that position was a testament to the universal power of recognizing potential in unexpected places. Born and raised in rural Japan, she had worked as a night cleaner in Tokyo's financial district while attending university during the day. Traditional Japanese companies had overlooked her despite her brilliant academic record, focusing instead on her working-class background and unconventional career path. Richardson Tech had recruited her specifically because of her unique perspective, not despite it. Her understanding of both Japanese business culture and the experiences of overlooked workers had made her instrumental in expanding Richardson's operations throughout Asia. Under her leadership, their Tokyo office had become their most profitable international location. "Nakamura-san," Dr. Sato said in perfect Japanese, bowing respectfully, "I understand your concerns about cultural compatibility, because I shared them myself when I first learned about Richardson Tech's approach. But I have discovered that the desire for dignity and recognition transcends cultural boundaries." She led the delegation through the Institute's interactive exhibits, each one designed to help visitors experience different perspectives within an organization. The most powerful was a virtual reality simulation that allowed executives to experience a day in the life of various employees, from board meetings to break rooms, from corner offices to janitorial closets. Nakamura emerged from the VR experience visibly shaken. For 30 minutes, he had experienced the working world through the eyes of a cleaning person in his own company, hearing conversations about budget cuts and layoffs that would affect people's families, feeling the weight of being invisible to the very executives whose decisions shaped his livelihood. "I had no idea," he whispered to Dr. Sato. "In my own building, there are people who see and hear everything, but whose perspectives I have never considered. Their insights could prevent problems before they become crises. This was the breakthrough moment that Maria had witnessed hundreds of times with leaders from every continent and culture. The realization that valuable intelligence existed throughout their organizations, waiting to be discovered by leaders humble enough to listen. The delegation spent the next 3 days experiencing Richardson Tech's culture firsthand. They attended the daily innovation sessions, where employees at every level shared ideas for improvement. They observed cross-functional teams solving complex problems by combining expertise from unexpected sources. They witnessed the mentorship programs where senior executives learned from frontline workers as much as they taught. Most importantly, they met employees whose lives had been transformed by being seen, heard, and valued. Tommy Rodriguez, now Richardson Tech's Vice President of Sustainability, shared how his mechanical insights had evolved into a comprehensive environmental program that had not only saved millions of dollars, but had positioned the company as an industry leader in corporate responsibility. Elena Vasquez had become something even more remarkable, a sought-after consultant who helped other companies implement inclusive leadership practices. Her presentations to Fortune 500 boards carried special weight because she spoke from authentic experience about what it felt like to transition from invisible to influential. But perhaps the most powerful story came from an unexpected source: Jennifer Walsh, the former marketing executive who had once mocked Maria's mopping technique. Jennifer had left Richardson Tech during the early days of transformation, unable to adapt to the new expectations for respectful leadership. She had struggled in subsequent positions, finally realizing that her attitudes toward colleagues had been limiting her own potential for growth and success. I spent 2 years learning the hard way that leadership based on looking down on others is ultimately self-defeating, Jennifer explained to the Japanese delegation during a video conference from her new position at a non-profit organization. Maria didn't just transform Richardson Tech. She created a model that forced people like me to confront our own biases and become better humans. I'm grateful for the painful lesson because it led me to work that truly matters. Jennifer's transformation had become a case study in business schools, demonstrating that the Richardson model wasn't just about helping undervalued employees. It was about helping privileged individuals recognize their own limitations and grow beyond them. On the final day of their visit, Nakamura approached Maria with a proposal that surprised even her. "Richardson-san, we would like to implement a pilot program at Yamamoto Industries, but we want to do it authentically, not superficially. Would you consider working undercover in our company, as you did here, to understand our specific challenges and opportunities?" Maria was intrigued by the proposal, but also concerned about the practical implications. "Nakamura-san, I'm honored by your invitation, but my face is now well known in business circles. Maintaining anonymity would be extremely difficult." Dr. Sato stepped forward with a solution that demonstrated the innovative thinking that inclusive leadership had fostered. "What if we create a program where current executives work temporarily in different roles throughout the organization? Not undercover, but with full transparency about the learning objectives. They could gain the perspective you gained, while employees know their voices are being heard at the highest levels." This idea sparked an immediate evolution in the Richardson model. Instead of requiring leaders to work in disguise, they could commit to spending significant time in various roles throughout their organizations, openly learning from employees at every level while demonstrating their willingness to understand different perspectives. The concept was tested first at Yamamoto Industries, where every executive committed to spending 1 week per quarter working alongside employees in different departments. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 6 months, employee satisfaction had increased dramatically. Innovative solutions were emerging from previously overlooked sources, and the company's financial performance had improved significantly. But the most remarkable outcome was personal transformation among the executives themselves. Nakamura later wrote to Maria, "I discovered that the janitor who cleans my office has a master's degree in engineering and has been quietly noticing inefficiencies in our production process for years. His suggestions have already saved us $2 million annually. More importantly, I learned that leadership means creating space for others to shine, not just shining yourself." Word of the Yamamoto success spread rapidly through Japan's business community, then throughout Asia, and eventually around the world. The Richardson rotation became a standard practice at progressive companies across multiple industries. CEOs were spending time in customer service call centers, learning what their products actually meant to the people who used them. CFOs were working in manufacturing facilities, discovering cost-saving opportunities that spreadsheets couldn't reveal. Marketing executives were serving in company cafeterias, understanding the daily conversations and concerns of their colleagues. Each rotation generated insights that traditional management structures had missed, but more importantly, they created emotional connections between leaders and employees that transformed organizational culture. When people knew their CEO had experienced the challenges of their daily work, they felt heard and valued in ways that no policy manual could achieve. 3 years after the first Japanese implementation, Maria received an invitation that brought tears to her eyes. The International Labor Organization, a United Nations agency, had selected her to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference on workplace dignity and human rights. The girl who had been invisible while mopping floors was being asked to address world leaders about creating workplaces where every person could thrive. The speech she delivered in Geneva became known as the Invisible to Influential Declaration, a call to action that challenged leaders in every sector to recognize the untapped potential in their organizations and communities. But the most powerful moment came when she introduced special guests who had joined her on stage: cleaning workers, security guards, cafeteria employees, and maintenance staff from around the world who had been empowered to lead innovation in their workplaces. These individuals represent millions of workers whose intelligence, creativity, and dedication have been overlooked by traditional leadership structures, Maria told the Assembly of Labor Ministers, corporate executives, and human rights advocates. They are not just the backbone of our economy. They are the brain trust we have been ignoring. Each guest shared their story of transformation, speaking in their native languages with translation provided. Ahmed Hassan from Dubai described how his maintenance insights had revolutionized building efficiency standards across the Middle East. Rosa Martinez from Mexico City explained how her custodial observations had led to improved workplace safety protocols that had been adopted by multinational corporations. Chen Wei from Shanghai shared how his night security rounds had generated customer service improvements that had increased client retention by 30%. The audience of global leaders sat in stunned silence as they realized the magnitude of potential they had been overlooking in their own organizations and countries. These weren't isolated success stories. They were proof of concept for a completely different approach to leadership and human development. Following the UN address, Maria was invited to establish Richardson Leadership Institutes on every continent. The facilities became pilgrimage sites for leaders seeking to transform their organizations, but they also became career development centers for workers seeking to expand their influence and impact. The institute in São Paulo was led by Carlos Silva, a former janitor who had become Brazil's most sought-after organizational development consultant. The Mumbai facility was directed by Priya Sharma, whose insights as a cafeteria supervisor had led to breakthrough innovations in workplace wellness. The Lagos Institute was headed by Adaura Okafor, whose security work had evolved into expertise in organizational risk management. Each institute adapted the Richardson model to local cultures and industries, but the core principle remained universal. Every human being possessed valuable intelligence and potential that could be unlocked. by leaders wise enough to listen and brave enough to act. By the time Maria celebrated her 10th anniversary as CEO of Richardson Tech, the company had become more than a business success story. It had become the catalyst for a global transformation in how societies valued work and workers. Universities were studying the Richardson model in sociology and psychology courses, not just business programs. Government agencies were implementing inclusive leadership principles in public service. Even military organizations were discovering that enlisted personnel often had strategic insights that traditional command structures had overlooked. The financial results spoke for themselves. Richardson Tech had become one of the most profitable and fastest-growing companies in their industry. But the human results were even more impressive. Employee satisfaction scores that consistently reached new highs, innovation metrics that left competitors struggling to keep pace, and customer loyalty that created sustainable competitive advantages. More importantly, former Richardson Tech employees were spreading inclusive leadership principles throughout the global economy. They were starting their own companies based on dignity and respect. They were transforming existing organizations from within. They were teaching their children that every person's work had value and that leadership meant service to others. The ripple effect had become a wave of change that was reshaping corporate culture across industries and continents. The woman who had been laughed at for mopping floors had triggered a revolution in human dignity that was touching millions of lives. On a quiet evening in her office, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The corporate headquarters now buzzed with energy and innovation 24 hours a day, but it also hummed with something more precious, the sound of people who felt valued, heard, and empowered to make a difference. Her grandfather's portrait still hung on the wall, but now it was surrounded by photos of employees from around the world who had found their voices and used them to create positive change. The legacy he had envisioned had grown beyond anything he could have imagined, proving that true leadership wasn't about commanding from above, but about nurturing potential from within. As Maria prepared to leave for the day, she noticed the evening cleaning crew beginning their shift. But unlike 5 years ago, these workers moved through the building with confidence and purpose. They weren't invisible. They were valued team members whose insights were regularly sought and implemented. She stopped to chat with Isabella Rodriguez, Elena's younger sister, who had recently been promoted to Facilities Innovation Coordinator after suggesting improvements to the building's energy management system. Isabella's ideas had not only reduced operational costs, but had earned Richardson Tech recognition as the most sustainable corporate facility in the Midwest. "How are the new efficiency protocols working?" Maria asked, genuinely interested in Isabella's assessment of recent changes. "Better than we projected," Isabella replied with pride. "The cross-training program you approved means our team understands the building's systems better than ever before. We're not just cleaning. We're optimizing the entire environment for productivity and comfort." This conversation, which would have been unimaginable during Maria's early days as CEO, perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred. Workers weren't just performing tasks. They were solving problems, driving innovation, and taking ownership of their organization's success. As Maria walked to her car that evening, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that the transformation was complete, but also ongoing. Every day brought new opportunities to demonstrate that true leadership meant creating conditions where every person could reach their full potential. The woman who had once been invisible while mopping these very floors had become a beacon of hope for millions of workers around the world. Her name wasn't just on Richardson Tech's letterhead. It was synonymous with a movement that had proven that dignity, respect, and recognition were not luxuries to be earned, but rights to be given to every human being. The story that began with laughter at a woman cleaning floors had evolved into a global testament to the transformative power of inclusive leadership. Maria Santos Richardson had not only changed her company, she had changed the world's understanding of what it meant to lead with humanity, courage, and unwavering respect for the potential that existed in every person, regardless of their position, background, or the work they did to make a living. The journey from invisible to influential had taught her that true success was not measured by what you accomplished for yourself, but by what you made possible for others. And as the sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city her grandfather had helped build, Maria knew that the most important work was not behind her but ahead, nurturing a generation of leaders who understood that the highest form of leadership was not rising above others, but lifting everyone up together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.